you technically like don't need the field and all the birds on a daily basis to
Yeah.
train these bird dogs, but I
Yeah.
think a lot of people feel like they do. But to your point, we're out here, you have some land, you have some birds, and we're out here this morning doing some short grass drills,
Yep.
and we're not planting birds. I
Yeah,
mean, we
majority of it's in the yard.
we did one because I wanted to see a cocker throw a
Yeah.
bird in the air,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
for the most part, like we just screwed around with the dogs with the Cato boards and some docking
Yeah.
bumpers
Yep.
and had some fun with it.
Yeah, you don't need much for sure.
Describe what we are doing. So, like, somebody's listening to this. Okay, I want to train the bird dog, and you're saying I don't have to drive the 2 hours to the training grounds.
Yeah.
What were we doing today, and how does that translate into
Yeah.
creating a bird dog?
So can I give you a little history on how I got to this point in life?
Have at it.
I'll make it
Yeah,
short though.
yeah.
So necessity is the mother of invention, right? So you jump back like 10 years ago and I wanted to have a national champion, but I didn't have any money. I didn't have land. Like I didn't really have any of the things you would traditionally think, well, you're going to have that in order to build a great dog. I lived in town. I had a medium sized backyard. It was fenced in, so I at least had that. Not a great job. I didn't, it wasn't like money was readily available to go buy. Birds are expensive. You
Yeah,
got to go buy
yeah.
pheasants. Like
They
that
add
adds up
up. Yeah.
really, really fast. So necessity was I got to find a way to maximize what I do have. So I did my best to reverse engineer like, okay, so this is what I want the dog to do out in the field. What can I do in my backyard to kind of replicate that? So I know I want a nice first cast. So when I tell the dog to get out, it takes a big cast, right? Well, I came up with drills that I could do to make sure I had a really nice first cast, and I could, some handling stuff where you're putting dummies in different corners of the yard and handling to those, and like you just try to come up
Incorporate
with
it.
like a micro picture of what's going to happen on the macro out in the field. So fast forward a little bit, a few years after living in that house, I moved out to the country and all of a sudden I had land, and I didn't have a lot of land, but I had access to a lot of land readily available. Take the four-wheeler, drive across the road and have 60 acres to train on. And I remember thinking at the time, like, I need to make sure, and I had already done well. I think I'd already placed at a nationals and I had dogs that were titled, FCs. And I remember thinking, I need to make sure that like this doesn't completely change my program. Like, I don't want to disrupt what I have, So like, let's use the land and let's use the birds to amplify or to just kind of augment a little bit what I'm doing, but I didn't want to foundationally change how I was training those dogs because what I had was working. So moved out there to the country, immediately mowed, like created a new backyard for my place. At the time that was pretty much pasture and I turned it I didn't want the tall grass. I wanted to like recreate my in-town backyard out in the country. And I did, after that, I got Cato, I think that same year when I moved to the country, and he ended up winning the nationals. But most of that training for Cato, I would say probably 95% of his training was in that mowed backyard, even though I was out in the country.
Mhm.
And it's the tempting thing to do. Can be way more fun to go out, put birds out, grab the shotgun.
Oh,
Like,
it's more fun. Well, I
yeah,
mean, there are some days that I have a lot of
you,
fun with the dogs in the short grass, but
but it's tempting.
we get bird dogs to go shoot
It's
birds.
tempting. You really have to like discipline yourself when it's like, okay, there's dessert over there, but I
Right.
really got to like eat the meat and potatoes first, right?
Yeah.
And so I did that. Like I kept it small, worked there in the backyard. I use a concept. It's an arbitrary number, but I call it the 10-foot circle, where I really want to make sure that I can accomplish everything I want inside of a 10-foot circle before I start expanding the boundaries. So if you can't recall a dog when it's within 10 feet of you, why are you taking it out into a field where it has all these other options and distractions? The likelihood of being successful are it's nil. It's not going to happen if you can't call it two in your backyard, right? Or if you want a nice delivery, which you saw my dogs today, I still need to work on that. But if I can't get a nice delivery in my yard, like why would I think I can go out in the field and have a nice delivery?
Yeah.
Or so like taking that concept, what we did today, we went out through a couple of Cato boards down and just started putting them through their paces. And I say paces, like paces are kind of like it, like we talked about. It is what it is. Like you're just let's make the dog do this and see if it can do it. So the one dog today, I'm just starting to work with her on handling on blind retrieves, and You saw I threw out a dummy. I sent her for it. I stopped her, and then I threw another dummy off to the side, and I gave her back to send her for the original one. Well, the last one I had thrown had created the most suction because it was the last one I had thrown. So she kept wanting to go for that, and I went out and I said no. Call her back in. Back. She tried to go for that one again. Nope. Call her in. And we did probably like 5 times, right? And
Hmm.
then finally she gave in. Went to the far one. Did the exact same drill again. She got it right. Did it a third time just to prove that she actually understood it. And then, so we made it small and it made it clearly defined for that dog. There was no complexity to it, really. There's not flying birds. There's not a bunch of people blowing whistles. It's just you, me, and the dog. The dog and me basically trying to learn this simple concept. And so it wasn't like we went out there with that game plan. Like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. It was just as I was working her, I was like, she's probably ready for something like this. And
Yeah.
I think one thing I strongly dislike is when people see something like that and they're like, oh, so that's the drill I need to go do.
Right.
So I'm going to do that every day for the next 2 weeks until my dog is perfect on it. Well, that's not what I may never do that drill with that dog again. Like literally, we may never do that again. I
Hmm.
just at that moment I did that because it was a chance for her to learn. Right? She screwed up. I don't care that she screwed up. What I care about is what was the outcome at the end. At the end, she was like, "Oh, I get what you want me to do." Right? Well,
Hmm.
that's a great. It's creating a problem-solving dog, and it's creating a dog that's like trying to understand what I want.
Yeah.
What I strongly dislike is a dog that's like, "I'm gonna do it my way." Like, and you're fighting, right? I don't want
Yeah.
to fight a dog. Now, what I was doing with her it almost looked like I was fighting her, but I wasn't fighting her. I had to communicate to her like this
Yeah.
is what I want. So as I walked out, I made it easier for her. Eventually, it was easy enough that she was successful.
And that's what I was about
But
to say is you didn't just stand there in the same place repeating the same commands and hoping that like, oh, now she's going to get it.
yeah,
No, you made it easier. You got closer, you started using your body position, you were giving the command like you weren't making it super easy to where it was idiot proof, but you were
right.
finding that line to where is this going to make sense to you,
Yep.
right? Like you're not just going to sit there and keep banging your head against the wall, but at the same time you don't immediately like, oh, you don't want to do this? Okay, well you don't have to do this. It's like, no,
Yeah, yeah. We're good. We have to do it.
yeah, we have to do it, but let's figure out how I can make
Yep.
this make sense to you.
Yep.
And it's interesting, something that was born out of necessity in a backyard to where then you have the option when you have all the space out in the country and you still choose to do that. We talk about it all the time on this podcast, and I think a lot of people they don't really take it as serious as what people are trying to communicate it as because it's like I go back to I did an episode years ago on sheepdogs with Fonzie Berson.
Yeah.
And the whole, I think the episode was called like distance erodes control. It's the same
Yeah.
thing. If you
Yeah.
can't do it within 10 feet, you can't do it, in an open field. And then we talk about don't use a command that you can't enforce. And so if the dog is way out there 100 yards and you recall them and they ignore you, that reinforcement schedule of them being like, no, I can
Yeah.
still go do what I want and not come back to you, it's like when we talk about doing stuff in the short grass, we truly mean like in a backyard, in the
Yeah.
suburbs or whatever, to where that is where you build these behaviors. And then on the weekends, when you do have the opportunity to get on birds or in the field and do what we really want to do, you're proofing that, you're
That's right.
generalizing it, but it's built in the backyard, it's built in the home.
Yeah. Yeah. And today, I mean, we're calling it short grass, but those dogs all started like inside or in the dog pen. I don't. That's not the first thing I do with an 8-week old dog is take them out in the yard because again, everything's relative in life. You take an 8-week old puppy out there in that yard and look at all these distractions, right? If I take them out in the pen and there's nothing in the pen, like now I have their focus. Our dogs that we ran today were old enough that to them the yard was a pretty sterile
Yeah.
environment. But it's through the eyes of that dog, like how many things are vying for their attention, and
And in recent weeks on this show, we've brought up and discussed slightly aquariums, and that's what we're talking about here is like the aquarium in which you train in, right?
yeah,
If you want to train inside, where there's no distractions and you're in like a really safe environment, or just there's nothing there but a place board, then the dog is going to interact with that place board. But then you
Yeah.
go outside and there's all this opportunity. To your point, like, it's hard to take a 16-week-old puppy and go out there and be like, pay attention, focus,
Right.
when there's so much other things pulling and vying for that attention. And we
Right.
saw that with Woody. We did these drills, and I call it dancing with the dogs. It's just fun because you don't know
Yeah.
what you're doing. It's just completely random. And we did your cockers. We went through my pointing dogs, and Woody was a puppy. He's 5 months old,
Yeah.
and it's just like, I'm working with him, but you saw he gets distracted and all of a sudden wants to just roll around in the grass,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah. That
and
was
it's
like his outlet.
yeah,
I'll just
and so
roll.
it's like, all right, we need to get out of this, but I also
Yeah.
still need to get a win to get out of this,
Yeah.
at least in my head. But
Yeah.
it's just interesting. I think a lot of people overlook the value of something like that, what we were doing today,
Yeah.
and not yeah, it's fun for us, but it is valuable to back to you throwing distractions, and that, oh, she's going to get sucked left, but I'm going to make her go to the bumper on the right.
Yeah.
You can kind of make this look however you want, and it builds a dog that is not only paying attention to you and understanding the commands and kind of going in and out of a whole bunch of different behaviors, but they're not anticipating it because it's truly
Yeah.
randomized.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, when they train stuff, they do everything the exact same way in the exact same order, and then when they go to a test or a new environment, they're shocked because the dogs don't know what that word means.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. And I there's a whole nother dimension to those yard drills. Like, if just thinking conceptually here, like, the dog doesn't speak English, right? So our job as a trainer is to find a way to communicate to that dog, right? So yeah, we're training the dog and we're trying to find a way to communicate to that dog. But then you think about us as handlers, well, we have to come up with a new language too, right? Like, it's not I can't use my first language. I can't use English to help this dog, so I have to learn like how to communicate better. The dog has to learn how to understand me, but I also have to learn to get better communicating. So I think there's a lot of value, especially for a newer dog owner, or if you haven't had a lot of dogs, to go out in the yard and teach that dog how to do things, whatever those things are, because you're going to get better as a handler. Like, your timing will get better. I see a lot, and I'm sure you've seen this too. Like, new handlers, it's it's tough. Oh, I forgot to say that, or you're 10
Mhm.
seconds late saying it, or 5 seconds late, but you might as well not said it or given the command at all because you were too slow, right? It's just not natural. Everything's kind of disjointed. The more time you spend doing these games and like silly drills, call them that, the better you get at communicating to the dog. Your timing gets better. You understand better how to communicate what you want. Um, the dog's learning, but you're also learning how to communicate. So I think it makes you a better trainer, and it makes the dog a better dog. So there's
Absolutely.
two edges to the sword.